Hey, I'm Sapphire. Want to hear something scary? There's no place like home, especially if it's haunted. In this next volume, I will be telling tales of homes that might have a few too many residents. These stories are all about old houses with sinister histories and spirits that just aren't ready to move out yet. For the first chapter, I will be telling you a story that my mother told me. When my mom was about 11 years old, her 3 siblings, and their parents moved to America from the Philippines. My grandma was friends with a woman named Francine, who lived in Hawaii with her husband, Decoy. She told them they could stay at their house until they got settled in. It was a fairly small house. There was one master bedroom where Francine and Decoy slept, one other bedroom where my mom's family stayed, and a living room area. My mom has many fond memories of living in that neighborhood, like learning how to ride a bike and playing by the nearby stream. But she also had many strange ones. For instance, Francine and Decoy owned the psychiatric institution that was right next door to the house, and my mom remembers seeing some of the patients running outside completely naked. Although surprising at first, her and her siblings got used to it, but none of them could explain away what happened on the night of Decoy's ex-wife's death anniversary. So Decoy was a moncadista, a member of the Filipino Crusaders World Army, which was a cult started by the politician and mystic Hilario Camino Moncado. His followers believed that he was a prophet with supernatural powers. He claimed that he had the ability to heal the sick. You could always spot a moncadista because of their long hair and beards, as it was against their beliefs to cut it. My mother remembers Decoy being very strong for his age. Perhaps that was due to the skeleton he kept underneath his bed, which according to the moncadistas, the bones of the deceased would give you strength. I heard that the skeleton under his bed is his ex-wife, some people said. But my mom never saw the skeleton. Decoy kept the master bedroom locked at all times, with a giant padlock on the outside. Who was he trying to keep out? Or in? One night, my grandparents were about to leave the kids in the house by themselves. It was the death anniversary of Decoy's ex-wife, and they were going to go to a celebration in her honor. The kids were a little scared to be left alone for the first time, and so Decoy's granddaughter left her little dog with them. "Don't worry, he'll protect you," she said, jokingly. So my grandparents drove away, and my mom and her siblings were left alone in the house. They were watching TV when all of a sudden, a chill shot up my mom's spine. The TV went white, and the power in the house went out. Then, the dog ran over to the bedroom door and started barking and running around in circles. The door to the locked bedroom began shaking violently. Nothing else in the house was rattling, and there were no windows open and no wind blowing. It looked like someone was trying to get out. "It's Decoy's ex-wife!" They screamed and ran out of the house, right when their parents were pulling into the driveway. The kids were crying and trying to tell them what happened. Decoy's granddaughter tried to calm them down and went inside the house to get her dog. She didn't come back out for a few minutes, but when she did, she was in tears. "I just saw my grandmother." If it was truly Decoy's ex-wife in that house that night, what did she want? What was she trying to say? This is a true story from a friend of mine who spent 3 months living in a haunted house. When Lauren was 4 years old, her dad got a new job in West Virginia. They bought a nice plot of land where they planned to build their house. It was going to be a while before they would be able to move in, and so they looked around for a house they could live in temporarily. They needed to find a place fast, and so they were excited to find one that was incredibly cheap. They pulled up to a large house made of old dark wood on Kenwood Place. The front yard had a tree from which a rickety old swing swayed in the wind. In the backyard was a pool. "This house was built in the 1800s. It's got a lot of charm and history, so are you interested?" the realtor said, shoving the contracts in front of them. They barely had a chance to look at the entire house, but Lauren's parents were so desperate to find a place that they weren't even taken aback by how insistent the realtor was. "It is a really good deal," Lauren's mom said, "and it'll only be temporary." "Yes, we'll take it," Lauren's dad told her. "Oh, thank God. Congratulations!" From the moment they moved into the house, everyone in the family had an uneasy feeling. but because they were desperate, they chose to ignore it. Odd things happened every now and then, like showers turning on and off when no one was in the bathroom. Lights would turn back on after being turned off. Lauren's parents would accuse her of playing with the switches, but Lauren was much too short to reach them. They also kept hearing weird muffled sounds, like groans and crying, all coming from the one room they hadn't had a chance to look at, the basement. "It's probably just old pipes," her dad would say. A week had passed since they moved in, and they decided to celebrate by taking a dip in their new pool. Lauren couldn't swim, so she stayed at the edge, right by her mother. Then the phone inside the house began to ring. "Honey, can you keep an eye on Lauren?" And no more than 1 second after she stepped out of the pool, she heard a loud splash. She turned around to find Lauren in the other end of the pool, sinking deeper and deeper under the water. Lauren's mother jumped back in and swam towards her daughter and pulled her out to safety. She has no idea how Lauren ended up on the opposite side of the pool in such a short amount of time. That wasn't the only time something unexplainable happened to Lauren. She never used to have trouble sleeping alone until she moved to that house. Some nights, before she went to bed, she would hear a woman say, "Good night," right as she turned off the lights. And it wasn't her mother's voice. The sounds from the basement continued until one day, her dad decided to go down there and investigate. He opened the door, turned on the lights, and screamed. Lauren and her mother came running, and her mother told her not to look, but of course she did. There, in the basement, was an antique electric chair. As it turns out, this house was used as a torture site in the 1800s, and many people suffered and lost their lives within these walls. Over the next 3 months, strange things continued to happen. Lauren's dad had a mysterious cut on his hand that wouldn't heal. Her mother almost suffocated from choking when she wasn't eating. They finally decided to sell the house and stay in a hotel until their new house was finished with construction. The day they left, Lauren saw a man waving goodbye to them on the front steps. It wasn't until they moved out of that house that they learned that the previous owners also had similar things happen to them. And the man who bought the house after them was arrested for being in possession of torture weapons, which he swears didn't belong to him, but were part of the house. Whether or not the people who were killed in that house deserve to die, they've made it very clear that they don't want to be the only ones to suffer there. In this next chapter, I'll be taking you down south to the French Quarter of New Orleans, Louisiana. Let's explore one of the most haunted locations in the entire city, the LaLaurie House. In 1832, Dr. Louis LaLaurie and his wife Delphine moved into their beautiful mansion at 1140 Royal Street. The house was made for extravagant parties and elite social gatherings. Madame LaLaurie was considered one of the most intelligent and beautiful women in the entire city. Every woman wanted to be her. But as beautiful as she was on the outside, people were beginning to suspect that something ugly was going on behind closed doors. Like most wealthy families during that time, the LaLauries owned slaves. They prepared the meals and made the fancy parties possible. But rumors began to stir. Madame's slaves seem to come and go quite often, don't you think? What do you mean? Look around. Do any of these workers look familiar to you? It seems like she changes them so often. Huh, I wonder why that is. Suspicions had been rising, but with no proof to back any of them up. Until one day, when a neighbor was climbing her stairs, she heard a scream coming from the LaLaurie house and looked over to see Madame chasing a little girl with a whip. There was nothing she could do but watch in horror as the little girl climbed to the rooftop with Madame following close behind. With nowhere to go, the little girl jumped. Even though slaves were barely considered human back in those times, there were still laws that prohibited exceptionally cruel treatment. So the neighbor called the authorities, who had the LaLaurie's slaves impounded and sold at an auction. But Madame was sneaky. She arranged for her relatives to buy her workers and sell them back to her. After that incident, Madame's reputation began to change. People were no longer eager to attend the parties at their house, nor even interact with the family. Eventually, they were alienated by the Creole Society. And in 1834, things would only get worse. The Madame kept her cook chained to the kitchen by her ankle. For whatever reason, Madame had threatened to take her to the upstairs room. This terrified the cook. Whenever anyone went up to that room, they never came back. The cook decided she would rather die by her own hand than to suffer by Madame LaLaurie's, so she set the kitchen on fire. It spread throughout the entire house, and not a part of the mansion was left unscathed. Neighbors came rushing over to help fight the flames, but after the smoke had cleared, they made a horrific discovery in the attic. What I'm about to tell you is possibly one of the most graphic and horrendous scenes in American history. You have been warned. The fire had burned down the door to reveal the upstairs room filled with dozens of naked slaves. Some were strapped to what looked like an operating table. A few were chained to the wall. Others were crouched in small cages. One woman had her stomach slit open and her intestines wrapped around her waist like a cruel corset. Another woman's mouth was sewn shut, after first having been filled with animal feces. A man had a hole drilled into his head with a stick inserted, presumably used to stir his brains. Most of them had been dead for a long time, and some were unfortunately not. Madame and her husband were both doctors, and some theorized that they were practicing risky medical operations on their slaves. But the inhumane condition that they were in suggests that their reasons were less medical and purely sadistic. After the news of the LaLaurie's torture room spread across the city, a mob ransacked their mansion and destroyed every last bit of property they owned. They even tore up the backyard, where they discovered dozens of buried skeletons, including that of a small child, presumably the young slave who jumped off the roof. The mob chased the LaLauries out of town, and that was the last anyone had ever seen of them. Ever since that day, that house has had trouble getting tenants to stay. Residents claimed to hear constant sounds of wailing. Children said they were chased by a woman with a whip. Year after year, the house would be bought just to be resold again. Today, the mansion is owned by an oil tycoon who doesn't allow anyone inside. I wonder what he's hiding. Paris, the city of lights. But what happens after the lights go out? In today's chapter, I will be telling a true story from my friend Leia, whose grandpa lived in a flat in France. In 2001, 14-year-old Leia, her brother, his girlfriend, and their parents traveled to Paris, France to visit Leia's grandfather. He lived alone in a 3-bedroom flat, a block away from the Luxembourg Gardens. The apartment was covered in antiques, from old paintings to vintage furniture. Her grandfather loved collecting items with a history. Leia and her mother stayed in one of the bedrooms together. Their first night in that room, her mother fell asleep before her. Once her snoring had stopped, she began whimpering. It looked as if she was crying in her sleep. Leia wasn't sure what to do, but it looked like her mother was hurting, so she lightly tapped her on the shoulder. She woke up with a gasp, assured Leia that she was fine, and went back to sleep. On the second night, Leia was awoken by what felt like an earthquake. She tried to turn to her mom to ask her if she felt it too, but she couldn't move. She could see her mom right next to her in the corner of her eye, but no matter how hard she struggled, she couldn't move her head. She tried to scream, but nothing came out. After what felt like hours, Leia was awoken again by her mother nudging her shoulder. Leia's brother and his girlfriend, Jen, stayed in a different room. Jen was a very devout Catholic. She wore a cross around her neck and wrapped one of her purses with a large rosary. One night during the trip, she woke up and saw a blonde woman standing over her. Jen couldn't move. After minutes of struggling, she woke up, clutching the cross around her neck. The blonde woman was nowhere to be found. She sat up to catch her breath and looked over at her purse. The rosary had been removed. The next morning, everybody met in the living room while Leia's grandfather prepared breakfast in the kitchen. Jen was looking at some of the decor in the room and gasped. She pointed at a small painting hanging on the wall. That woman. I saw that woman in my dream last night. Leia and her mother walked over to the painting. Oh my God, I saw her too. The first night we were here, I woke up in the middle of the night and she was in our room. She was standing over you and said, "Can I touch her?" And I kept trying to tell her no, but I couldn't move. And then you woke me up. I think I saw her too, Leia said. I was brushing my hair in front of that old vanity in our room, and it started to feel like someone was standing behind me. The mirror is a little splotchy, but I could have sworn I saw a face slowly start to form in the mirror, but I ran out of there before I could find out. Leia's grandfather walked in carrying a tray with coffee. Grandpa, who's the woman in this painting? Oh, that's Marie. She owned this place before passing away a few years ago. The room that you and your mother are sleeping in was hers, actually. Why do you ask? They decided not to tell him about their experiences since he lived alone and they didn't want to scare him. Later that day, Leia and her family began to pack their things and prepare for their flight home. Her grandfather pulled her aside and said, "I want to show you something." She followed him into a room where he pulled out a beautiful jewelry box. Inside was a collection of intricate ivory hair pieces and combs. "Do you want them? I feel like you'd really like them. They belong to Marie. Please, take them." His insistence weirded her out a little bit, and she politely declined. After that trip, Leia's mother came up with a theory that Marie really took a liking to Leia, and it was probably her who was subconsciously telling her grandpa to give her the jewelry box as a parting gift. So, the next time they visited the flat, her mother spoke to Marie. "Hi, we're here. Look, we enjoy visiting, but we won't come back if you keep doing things to scare us." And ever since then, no one in the family experienced anything strange in that house. Marie seems like a harmless spirit, but it is sort of odd how everyone in Leia's family had a terrifying episode of sleep paralysis while staying in that house. Do you think Marie was causing it? Or was this all just a big coincidence? If I were you, I'd lock my doors before listening to our final chapter. This is the story of Donna, a young girl who was left home alone one night for a little too long. There once was a 15-year-old named Donna. Her mother died when she was very young, and it was just her and her dad ever since, living in a peaceful suburb. They had grown incredibly close over the years. They would always know what the other was thinking, and even feel when the other was near. Some joked that they were psychically connected. One morning, Donna and her father were having breakfast. "I've got a meeting later today," he said. "I'll be home late, so don't wait up for me." He left some cash for her to order dinner, kissed her on the head, and headed out the door. Later that day, Donna came back home from school. Usually her dad would be home from work at this time, so it was weird coming home to such a still and quiet house. So she sat at the kitchen table and started to do some homework. Suddenly, she felt a sharp pain in her neck. It went away as quickly as it came, so she decided to ignore it. Ow! Her neck stung again. The pain was getting more and more intense. She ran to the freezer to grab an ice pack and placed it on her neck. The pain began to fade away. I wonder what that was all about, she thought to herself. It was now 8 o'clock and still no word from her dad. She figured she could wait up a little longer for him and decided to order some pizza. "Hi, I'd like to make an order." "Yeah, sure, I can hold." The subject is still on the loose. The police are recommending everybody lock their doors and windows and not answer the door for anybody, especially at night. "Hi, can I get a large pepperoni pizza?" It was getting pretty late and she began to doze off on the couch and dream. She was a little girl again, in the house she used to live in when her mom was still alive. Donna was sitting at the kitchen table and she looked over at the stove where a woman with her back turned was making breakfast. "Mom?" The woman turned around. It was her mother. She walked over to the table and placed a plate of eggs in front of Donna. She whispered in her ear, "Don't open the door." What? Suddenly, she found herself standing on the side of a busy highway, cars flying past her. She could hear someone calling her name in the distance. "Donna! Donna! Donna!" Across the highway, she began to make out a figure. It was her dad. "Donna, don't open the door." "Dad, I can't hear you. Where are you?" "Don't open the door." Donna sat up on the couch. What a weird dream. Felt so real. The doorbell rang again. "Oh, my food's here." She stood up and started walking towards the door, but stopped when she passed a window. It was a lot darker outside than she remembered. How long was I asleep for? She looked at her phone. It was 1 a.m. She called up the stairs. "Dad? Are you home?" The doorbell began to ring more persistently. "Dad, is that you?" She went to the door and looked through the peephole. It was her dad. Finally. She went to slide the lock open, but quickly locked the door again. Something wasn't right. She didn't have that feeling when she knew her dad was nearby. Then she remembered her father's voice from her dream. "Don't open the door." She looked through the peephole again. "Dad, are you okay? Did you forget your keys? Is someone there with you? Dad, why are you acting really weird?" The doorbell kept ringing. "I need you to answer me. I'm not opening this door until you answer me. The ringing went on and on and on. She didn't know what to do. Eventually, she collapsed on the floor in tears and ended up falling asleep next to the front door to the seemingly never-ending bell. Donna woke up the next morning on the doormat. The doorbell had stopped ringing. "Dad, are you home?" No reply. She looked inside the peephole. Her dad was still there, staring at her just as he had the night before. She carefully opened the door and froze. Her father's head stared back at her. On the ground was a note. "I know you're all alone now." Thanks for watching. Do you have any ideas for future volumes? I'd love to hear them in the comments. Want something scary for your phone? Make your home screen haunted with our new wallpapers available to download now for free. And for a limited time, you can now purchase a Something Scary poster. For more information, click the link in the description below. Like this video if it gave you the chills, and don't forget to subscribe to Snarled and check out our other videos. And if you dare to follow me, my links are in the description below. Until next time, sweet dreams.